Our Father in heaven, we thank you for another week. We thank you for everything you did for us, for bringing us here in your message. We're asking for the Holy Spirit to help us in our meeting tonight, to help us understand the issues and be on the right side. In Jesus' name we prayed. Amen.
Mhm.
So I'm going to say this because I can't see everybody. If anybody has to make a comment, just speak up and I'll stop, okay? So this was done November 6, 2019 in number 12 from Australia. The title is What is the Great Test? This is the time when Parminder and Sister Tess, they were answering some of the videos that were coming from FFA. So this is one of them. I have to tell you from the beginning, like the last part of the lecture is still difficult for me to understand because I don't know which video of Jeff Pippinger he's talking about and what they were saying. But if somebody understands, then we'll be happy to hear the explanation. Okay, so last day events 227.3. This is what Ellen White says. She says that the Lord has clearly taught her, shown her, that the image of the beast test, which is the Sunday law test, occurs before the close of probation, and it is the great test that God's people have to meet before Daniel 12:1. The probation closes before the shut door. What we've done is taken that statement and instead of applying it or using it in the way that it was originally intended, we've taken that and put it into a different context with a different target audience. So what we've done is we moved the close of probation from Daniel 12:1 to the Sunday law. And then we've taken the image of the beast test and been forced to bring that to a history or an event that precedes Daniel 11, verse 41. This is 11, verse 41. Therefore, this is the history of 1140, part B. When this passage first began to be addressed, people were using the events of 2015 to mark the fulfillment of this prophecy. So I'm going to put 2015 here. I put it in parentheses because that is not true. It's incorrect. I put an X by it so that you can remember. What they would argue is that there was a law that was put in place in the United States, the same-sex marriage law, where people of the same gender were given the same legal rights, the same legal standing as heterosexual relationships, and this movement saw that as an aberration of the marriage institution. Connected with that event in the summer of 2015, we had a general conference session in our church where there was a vote on women ordination. In this vote, women's ordination was prevented from being passed mainly because of the work of the African conferences, and I believe some of the South American conferences. And if I can say it this way, it was the conservative conferences division, unions that were put in to block the women's ordination because the Europeans and the North Americans, they were happy to have women pastors. In fact, they already had women pastors. In some places they were ordained. In other places they were functioning as ministers, but they were not yet ordained. In 2015, that vote got rejected, got turned down, and so we don't have an official position that allows women to have equal status with men. But because that issue happened within the church at the same time as it has in America, we saw this as the issue of the image of the beast. Now, the reason why this becomes problematic is because the person that instituted that law was President Obama, as we all know. And in that time period, many of us would see any president, any leader, as being wrong or bad or evil, if I can say it that way. So we bought into this idea that Obama was a bad person, and he, as well as any other president of the United States, would bring in Sunday law. That was our position. And in fact, rightly or wrongly, really wrongly, there were rumors that were discussions that people would have that many years ago, some people heard that many years ago, some Adventists had a dream that was going to be a black president who would bring in Sunday law. And for some people in the congregation, it's a well-known story in Adventism. So people took that story and said, wow, a miracle has happened. We've got a black president. That could never have happened. Maybe that dream is going to be fulfilled. So we had the little ideas like that. People saw that he was a bad president. He introduced what is termed the Obamacare bill, which was basically taking the health service, the private health system that they had in America, and nationalizing it. He wanted to take it much further than it actually got taken. And people saw that because they were being forced to enter into a relationship with the government that made them take out health insurance, and they saw this as a violation of their constitutional right. So they saw this as evidence that President Obama would dismantle and destroy the Constitution. They saw this as a prelude, obviously, to the close of probation or to Sunday law. So that's a bit of a backdrop of why 2015 becomes a point of contention. Now it's been clearly stated over the last 12 months that when you start thinking about two streams of information, just want to refer us back to this presentation that Sister Tess did earlier today. She's already identified that we had two streams of information in 4 different organizations. She's done the USA, Adventism, Papacy, and this movement. USA, CNN, and Fox. Adventism, I put this in. He didn't have it on the board, but what he explained later than I could put it in is conservative and liberals. Papacy, EWTN, and NCR, and our movement, FFA, and us. So I'm going to ask the question, what's the 2 streams of information in Adventism? She didn't go into details of that, but it's going to go along the same lines of conservative and liberal ideology. She's already demonstrated through the news reports that she briefly mentioned. You can go and check them yourself in the papacy, how you've got these 2 streams of information. Hopefully we can see that. She's mentioned the names of these 2 streams. She's spoken about the 2 streams of information in our movement, FFA, and the movement that we have, and in the United States, CNN and Fox. I will remind us that when it says the USA, here most countries have their 2 streams of information, a liberal source and a conservative source. People had to have a real misunderstanding of how this all operates, of who is good and who is bad. Because you go to any person, just look in the mirror, depending on what time of the day is, depending what day of the week is, depending what year in their life is, you're all good or you're all bad. We do many good things and many, many bad things. We make mistakes. We have wrong ideas. We have wrong concepts. So what people do is they say that, CNN, they do plenty of wrong things, and Fox do plenty of right things. And sometimes they have the same perspective. So they want to turn all of this into something that's not clear, that's really muddy. So it becomes a confusing idea, so there's no clarity. Now, if you take that concept, that idea about what I want to call muddying the waters, if you have ever done evangelism, if you have ever gone to an evangelical Christian and tried to persuade them to be an Adventist, you know the technique that they're going to use is muddying the waters. They're going to make it so confusing that what we believe is black and white, Sabbath or Sunday, they're going to make it such a confusing, such a complex issue that they're just going to destroy your message. Depending on how competent you are, how much grit that you have, and how clever they are, depends on who will win that argument. You are a Christian and you go to speak to an atheist, someone who believes in evolution, you can have the same problem whether you go to the fossil records or the age of the earth or carbon dating. Everyone's going to have their perspective and they will run circles around you. They would make everything muddy so you don't have this clear black and white perspective of what's right and what's wrong. It all becomes people's personal perspective. And that is what FFA is doing when we start dealing with these two streams of information as you go through. So we need to be really clear on this issue. Whether there is either light or darkness, absolute truth and absolute error. And the reason why people find it difficult to see this is based upon our heritage as conservative Christians. Because we have this mindset that when we talk about perfection, we conceptualize perfection as being 100% or totally perfect. And that really is not so. You can only be perfect in your sphere as a human being. And however great you think human beings are in the chain of life, the chain of creation, we're pretty low compared to God. The whole perspective of who we are, when God says, be perfect as I am perfect, be sinless, has to be understood in its context as a human being, not in the context of God. This is a root problem that many people have. The other problem that people have is actually trying to identify what defines sin or sinlessness. But Ellen White makes it really simple. She talks about the great test. She doesn't talk about multiple tests. She doesn't say some multifaceted test. She just says it's the test, singular, definitive article. So we know that the great test is the image of the beast. We need to work out what the image of the beast is. If you're a round-of-the-mill Adventist unlike ourselves, you know that the image of the beast, you know what the image of the beast test is. It's the issue of the Sunday law, whether you're going to worship God on Saturday or Sunday. It's not asking people anything else. It's not asking, what do you do with your money? Do you covet your neighbor's goods? Did you commit adultery last week? Do you lie and steal or cheat? And that's not the great test. The great test is really simple. It's the singular test that's easily definable, and everyone can see which side of argument you're going to stand upon. And what God does, being clever as He is, He's going to use this singular test to be the marker to determine who is His disciple and who is not. Now, if I were to ask you if you are God's disciple or not, hopefully we'd all answer yes. And then I would ask you, if you were God, how would you be able to show people who are yours and who are not yours? I think most people are going to say those people who are good as opposed to those people who are bad. Then we'd argue of what is good and bad look like, because if you go to the Gentiles, they look pretty good, don't they? We have a biblical argument to prove that. The story of the Good Samaritan. Who was the good person in that story? It's the world, not the church. So when we started talking about that, then it becomes a confusing issue because we don't know how to define what good and bad is. It becomes an unmanageable problem. So what God does, it's because we're humans, we're very simplistic. He just breaks it down into a really simple issue, which he calls what? The great test. Singular test. It is easy to deal with. You know whether you're passed or failed. It's not some nebulous idea, this nebulous concept, so that you go through this experience this way, marking you. I wonder if I passed or not. This is why people in this movement on the right side who are still struggling are saying, I hope I'm going to make it through 9/11. I hope I'm going to pass the test because I did something bad the other day, or I don't feel right about myself, or I got out of the bed on the wrong side, or I'm feeling a bit grumpy today and I'm depressed. People are struggling with all these ideas and they have no idea whether they can pass or fail tests. So if you don't have any idea, who has the idea? Who knows? You're going to say, well, God knows. If God knew what side you were on, he wouldn't need to devise all these tests. We don't need to have any tests because he's the one who's in control of everything and he knows the end from the beginning. He knows which one of us is going to pass anyway. What's the purpose of all these tests? Who is it for? You go to Daniel 7, he tells you, thousands upon 10,000s of people stand and watch, and the judgment is set. The whole issue of all of this stuff is not for God to understand what's going on. It's so that we can understand what's going on. Go to the story of Job. We discussed this morning in a conversation that we were having. What does God say when he looks at Job? He doesn't say that Job is perfect or not. He states it as a fact. Who doesn't know? Satan doesn't know. He says, go and check and look, and you'll see. Look at his behavior. Look how he deals with problems. And Satan says, he hasn't even been tested. You got to apply a specific test to know if he's good or bad. Not so that God will know if he's good or bad, so that who would know? So that Satan would know and Satan's agents, Job's friends. And not only Satan and Job's friends, who else would know? Job himself. Job doesn't even know what perfection looks like. When he goes through the experience, how does he feel? It feels bad. Did he pass the test? He certainly passed the test because look at the reward that he gets at the end. Who pays him the reward? Who pays him the seed money? His friends do. His friends have to fork out the money and start up a company, if you can say it that way, because they got it all wrong. So everyone needs to learn about what righteousness looks like and how it's evidenced, except one person, God. He already knew. So when we start talking about perfection and the test, it has to be an issue that is really clear and easy to understand. It cannot be muddy or complex. In fact, who are the people that say it's complex? It's Job's disciples or his friends. They're the ones who muddy the waters because they say, we can't tell if you're good or bad. So I want us to be clear on this issue. When we start talking about these two streams of information, if you want to know whether you passed or failed the test, you need to know that the test is easy to see and to be identified, which brings us back to the story about the image of the beast, of how we've got it all wrong. We've got it all wrong because we don't understand how parable teaching works. Can you just see that this is a parable teaching? You are going to compare and contrast two groups, two messages, two ideologies, two concepts. The problem is, in some ways, they look very similar. So you go to United States, Sister Tess brought CNN and Fox. We could have put something else. We could have put the Democrats and Republicans. Where did the Democrats and Republicans live? They live in the same house, don't they? Of course they do. They work for the same system. They're paid by the same bank, and they're the same thing. How many Democrats are bad people? Lots of them, maybe all of them. There are none good, no, not one. But the test or the issue that we're dealing with, we carve a path through all of that noise and we're able to see clearly who is good and who is bad. You can go to the Spirit of Prophecy quote that basically says, there are a few good men that hold the whole system in check. I mean, the great controversy. And what she's talking about is that there's this monolithic movement that wants to destroy God's people, to overtake the world, and the people that are going to stop them are these few people, and they are politicians that are going to be doing that. So you need to ask yourself, those politicians that are going to be doing that great work of stopping this whole system, are they good people or bad people? The way we think about it, because we're so ingrained in our false ideas, we think they're holy, righteous people. I want us to think about this. This monolithic system is all a religious entity. The Christian conservative right. Everyone knows that. They're apostate Protestants, Catholics, if you want to go to the dragon power, with all these people with spiritualistic idea, but they're all conservative in their perspective. So who would fight them? Our perspective is the people who fight them are equally righteous Christians, but that can't be the case. You just see in the world today, it doesn't work that way. You go to America and you know it's not operating that way. The people who are resisting this Republican movement, this right-wing conservative led government, are people that we could call worldly, are people who are liberal, people who perhaps don't have any religion, who are easygoing, who have no standards. We call them Democrats. So when Ellen White talks about these people who are going to resist the move for Sunday, we need to really rethink if we believe here at the end of the world who and what those people look like. So it's not that they are good or bad. It's that they have a different ideology, a different perspective. Now, the reason why this becomes important, if we believe that Donald Trump is the last president, he's going to bring a Sunday law, someone needs to resist him. Who was the person that wanted to resist him? Hillary Clinton. So if she wanted to resist him, how can we develop a theology that would have said she could have introduced a Sunday law if she was put in power? It's not a correct prophetic model. She's a globalist. That's the kind of term that people use. And he's a nationalist. And the problem is, FFA holds the same perspective, the same idea as this group of people. He's pointing at Fox. So when we look at what we believe right and wrong to be, it has to be a very narrow, specific issue, which Ellen White will call the great test. It's not some general nebulous idea of who's good and who's bad. It's not like that. So when we start talking about these movements and we start saying Fox and FFA, EWTN, this is one perspective, one worldview compared to another worldview, which is all these ones that we've spoken about. And you're going to get the same issue here in Adventism. The reason why this becomes important is because when you see the fight between Clinton and Trump, this is between someone who wants to introduce the Sunday law and someone who's going to resist the Sunday law. This is why we see the dismantling of EU, the European movement, the attack upon NATO. All of this work has been undertaken through the Trump presidency. The reason why that becomes important to see is because most of us have been brought up to believe that the EU is some evil conspiracy, some organization that was invented in some meeting that Satan had to bring the world to an end. Call it the globalists. And it's a completely wrong perspective of what end time prophecy looks like. So you have heard us teach unequivocally that this is good, unequivocally, that this is good, CNN, and this is bad, Fox. Even though they may have many wrong ideas, they may have their own agenda, which we would not agree with. And if this were a symbol of the Democrats and the Fox would be the Republicans, then the Democrats would be good and the Republicans would be bad. And that's why we've developed this argument to say that what's happening here in 2015 was not the image of the beats test that was being introduced by President Obama. So we've made the argument that Obama is good and Trump is bad. I want to read to you something. This is taken straight from FFA. This was done sometimes in October this year, 2019, towards the end of October. Sister Tess claimed that Obama was a constitutional expert, which is a bunch of hooey. Obama is as much a narcissist as Trump. If Obama had actually excelled in his college education, he would have flaunted his record, but he has never allowed them to be released. He was evidently a failure excelling in the education he chose. And Tess identifies him as a constitutional expert because he received a meaningless title at one point in his life. She describes Trump's executive order disregarding all of Obama's executive order. And the fact that Obamacare was pushed through without anyone ever reading it. I can see those three representing specific issues that contribute to the civil war in the United States. Those being feminism, Hillary, conspiracy theories, Trump and race, Obama. But she went the exact socialistic mile when she placed the Obama as a symbol of race without identifying that he's obviously a racist. He goes on and on. All I want to point out after this rant, what do you get at the end of that? What did you pick up? That there's no difference between Obama and Donald Trump. Any one of them could have been the president and any one of them could have introduced a Sunday law. So if anyone could have introduced the Sunday law, who was stopping Obama from introducing the Sunday law? You have to come up with some kind of conspiracy that says, like, God was doing it or things weren't quite ready. You'll have to come up with some kind of answer to say that Obama could have, but he didn't. And this is where the wheels fall off the axle in their message. You now get to a place where there is no distinguishing mark between Trump and Obama, between the Republicans and Democrats. They're all bad. It's a free for all. There's no such things as two streams of information. And if that's the case, you go back to this history here, pointing to the lines of 144,000 the priests, Levites, Nethinims. If you go back to this story, three-fourths of the work for the Nethinims is done in the history before the Sunday law. This is the Sunday law. This is Daniel 11:41. Now, we all believe, and I'm sure FFA believes, that to actually go through this line, to be cut out of something, you need a true message. I'm assuming that's inherently obvious. So the Nethinims must have a true message from somewhere to be given to them in order to begin this line. In fact, three-quarters of their history is before the Sunday law. So it must be truth. They must be receiving it from somewhere. So either they don't believe in this waymark, beginning the line of the Nethinims, where it is, or they're going to have to come up with some different kind of answer. Now we understand that this waymark is 2014. From 2014 begins these three dispensations for the Nethinims. Even if you don't understand the plowing and all of those symbols, what you have to understand is that these Nethinims need some kind of message. If they need a message, who is giving them the message? And the message that they receive has to be a true message. I think that's obvious. If they're going to be cut out from the world, must be a true message that cuts them out, because the world is a false message. And if it's so, and it's in 2014, who's doing that message? We've gone over this so many times. It's not us. It must be the world. If it's the world, you know they're not getting it from the Bible. That's clear. They're not getting this message from the Bible, even though they don't realize it's a prophetic message because they don't understand about prophecy. What must that message be to them? If they are not going to get it from the Bible, they're going to get it from their own understanding. They must understand what is right and what is wrong, mustn't they? Because the message is the right message as opposed to a wrong message. The world is wrong, this statue. To get out of that, you must have something that's right. They need to understand where to differentiate between right and wrong. Does everyone in the world understand what's right and wrong? Of course they do, because everybody understands morality. There are moral issues going on, which are going to cut out these people. So all you need to do is understand what are the moral issues that are going on in the world. And we know this is going to happen in the United States because that's where all the trouble is happening. It's not the only places. It's happening in the world, but we're going to our story from the we're going to take our story from the United States. All you need to do is go to the United States and figure out what is right and what is wrong behavior. Same moral issue, because they don't understand that they're living in the reform line. All they can understand is morality. You know, that's the case. What identification do we give for President Donald Trump? We say he's the last president. How do you know he's the last president? You go to the world, you go to these people. I want to make another statement. We're not only saying he's the last president, we say he's a good or a bad president. Bad. What makes him bad? Because he's a bad person? No. Is it because he's a narcissist, as we just read here? No. It's because he's going to do what? Bring in a Sunday law. That's what makes him bad. It's not his morality that makes him good or bad. So we say he's going to be the last president. Ask any of these people from the world. Ask, is he a good or bad president? What are they going to say? He's bad. What makes him bad? They're not going to have the same reason that we have. They're going to say, you know what? As bad as he is, we'll just swallow deeply because in 4 years, what's going to happen? He's going to be out and he's going to be replaced. 5 years at the moment because we've gone through this election cycle. We haven't gone through this election cycle yet. The maximum we've got to do is suck it up for 5 years and then he's out. So you know they do not have a prophetic perspective of what's going on. They just don't. They may use prophetic language. They may inadvertently say some prophetic statement, but they don't have a prophetic message because they believe once he's finished his presidency, we are going to go back to normality. We'll go back to the system. He's just an odd aberration. And yet you have people commenting saying that he's gone so far that we're never going to go back to normality. That may or may not happen from their perspective, but all of them know that sometime sooner or later they're going to get rid of him. Because even if it's run by the Republicans, the next time around they're not going to get someone who's as strange or bad as he is. So can we see it's so easy to understand that the world knows who is good and who is bad? So if they can figure it out, how comes we can figure out who is good and who is bad? How comes we can figure that out? And that's where the problem lies. So you can see the perspective that Future for America has, and they become so bold to openly say this now that there is no difference between Obama, Clinton, and Trump. And that by its very definition is a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory to believe that there's no difference. The reason why this is so crazy is because if we compare the movement with Adventism, would we know that there is a good stream and a bad stream of information, a good message and a bad message? Of course we would, because we invented this concept. The everlasting gospel is a three-step prophetic testing message that creates and then demonstrates two classes of people with two ideas, two ideologies, two messages. You either have the gospel message or you have some alternative version. We have the gospel, Adventism doesn't. So this idea of two streams of information, two groups of people, two messages, is something that we have well understood, and we've understood this idea within the movement as we saw people leaving the movement from 2014. Path of the Just, Tree of Life, we understood that they had a crazy message which was not fit for purpose. It was easy to see two ideologies, two messages, two streams of information. But now we've identified that FFA is one of those streams, one of those ideologies, one of those messages, and that's where all of this begins to become unstuck for them. They want to create a new narrative that they don't believe in two streams of information. That's why they did this, hiding Mother Angelica. Because they have no idea about two streams of information, they just don't understand it. And as we were taught earlier, they believe in things being half right and half wrong. We discussed that earlier on in the year. When they begin to deal with Mother Angelica, they're half right on that subject, but they're half wrong. This idea of half right and half wrong is a continual point of problem in their methodology, in their idea. They don't understand the difference between right and wrong. It's clear to see. If it wasn't clear to see, there's no way that you and I could understand whether we've passed or failed the test. And we know this from all the previous issues. The 2520, you know if you've passed or failed a test on 2520. It's whether you believed it. 9/11, 1989, the Time of the End magazine. Over and over again, it was clear to see whether or not you passed or failed the test. In fact, last year only they knew that time had now become a test. If you didn't accept time setting, you were out of the movement. And if you did, you were part of the movement. Clear to see the difference between right and wrong until now. And that's what each of us needs to understand clearly, that FFA have become unstuck. I want to come back to this issue. This is not 2015. That's not what the image of the beast test is. The image of the beast test, if we looked at this before, I'm sure most of us, in fact, maybe if I asked you, some of us would have said it's 9/11. This is the test, the great test of God's people to bring them to the Sunday law. But it isn't 9/11. It's 2014. Before we thought it was 2015. It's not 2014, so I rub that off. I know then I I know then I would ask you, what would that image of the beast test be? And I said, if I asked you this a few years ago, most of us would have said 9/11. In fact, today some of us would still say 9/11, but I'm saying it's 2014. This is the great test that we need to see before we come to the close of probation. I want to read something again. This is taken from late October. It's another whole passage that Elder Jeff has stated, and I'm not sure where it was, maybe a presentation or a conversation. This one's a little bit longer, but I want to read this. And as we read this, you're going to see this is a connection to all of this, showing to the four line, the 144,000 priests, Levites, and Nethinims. It's a connection to this story here, but then I want to show us it's also connection to this story here, the story of the test image of the beast, Daniel 11:41 to Daniel 12:1. So I've got 2014 and I've got 9/11 put in the parentheses. What would that image of the beast test be? Parminder placed an undue balanced weight on Daniel 12:1. In so doing, he avoided a fact that was already established, and in so doing brought in confusion on the subject. Once confusion takes place with the truth, then as time proceeds, uncertainty is attached to the truth. The fact that was in place before Parminder began his dismantling of truth that were already established was the probation clauses for the priests at a point in time. but for the Levites and the Nethinims, it closes progressively. I don't want to be too much commenting, but all that he said here is that I place too much emphasis on Daniel 12:1. You can see I'm placing too much emphasis on Daniel 12:1 because I want us to anchor us here, close of probation, Daniel 12:1. And he wants to anchor us here, close of probation, Daniel 11:41. So you see this undue emphasis on this, that's one point. What he's really referring to is this waymark here. This is Daniel 12:1. I place too much emphasis here, and the second point he brings up is that everybody knew the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. The probation of the priest closes at one point in time, and the probation of the Nethinims and the Levites is a progressive matter. We all knew that, and because I emphasized it, I introduced confusion into the movement. We already know that it's a point in time for priests, progressive for Levites, and progressive for Nethinims. There's this idea, and what I place too much emphasis on Daniel 12:1, and so I'm introducing confusion into the movement. It closes for the priests at Raphia, and then it closes progressively for the Levites, beginning at Panim until the Sunday law. It closes progressively for the 11-hour workers, the Nethinims, at the Sunday law until Micah stands up in Daniel 12:1. So up to this point, all of us and them, are in agreement. This comment is probably 2 weeks old, so you can see that they're holding onto the same perspective of priests, Levites, and Nethinims as we hold on to. Point for priests, period of time, is the close of probation. The structural placing of this is the same place that we do, Raphia, then Panion to Sunday law to Daniel 12:1. So we're all in agreement here. Parminder began to place the emphasis. We see where things began to go wrong. Began to place the emphasis on Michael standing up as the close of probation for the 144,000 and essentially created 4 close of probations. One for the priest of our history, one for the Levites, one for the Nethinims, and one for the 144,000. So if you see that's accurate, that's what I have done. When Michael stands up, it is the end of probationary time for all mankind, and it is the end of the judgment of the living that began at 9/11, not the Sunday law as Parminder falsely teaches. So I've claimed that the judgment of the living begins at the Sunday law, and he says it begins at 9/11. So 9/11, you begin to see why they would make this image of the beast is failing 2015. Most people would gravitate to 9/11. I just sort of make some comments on this thing. Now, if we want, you can go for thus saith the Lord, or if you want, you can use Ellen White's writings to understand what's going on. Is there any other way to do it? The Bible and the spirit of prophecy. Is there any other way to actually understand what end time prophecy looks like? The answer is no. Of course, there's no other way. It's the only source of information that we have. We have to take all of those words and try to create a story that makes sense. Hopefully, you'll all agree with that. We've already done this number of times. Ellen White is going to give us a reformed line, and this reformed line is this one here. It's the only one that she gives to us. It goes from 1798 to 1844, which is the plowing, then early rain, latter rain, and harvest. The Sunday law to the close of probation to the second advent. And this is done in great controversy. And you can put an agricultural line here, agricultural mother, then you have the plowing, the former rain, latter rain, and harvest. The problem that we find in our movement is that what we have done is introduce or create waymarks. The true primary waymarks that we've created or introduced are here 1989 and 9/11. And the question is, how did we create those waymarks? Where do we get them from? And I want to argue that it's absolutely clear to see that is not from a thus saith the Lord. You cannot take a thus saith the Lord, at least the thus saith the Lord, as I understand what that term means. You take the word as written, and you just take them at face value. They are what they say they are. And then you make a conclusion about what you just read. That to me is what thus saith the Lord is. You don't take those words and try to spiritualize them away, or you don't make an application of them, or you don't take them out of their context. You take them as they are written. That to me is what a thus saith the Lord is. And if you took that principle, how on earth you get those two waymarks, 89 and 9/11? We'll go with this first one, 1989, the time of the end. If you go to Daniel 11, verse 40, how many time of the ends is there in that passage? It's only one. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall push against him. There's only one time of the end. Ellen White is going to comment many, many times on not just what that verse itself, but the whole concept of the time of the end. And how many she gives you? Only one. The Bible and the spirit of prophecy are consistent on this point. There's only one time of the end, not two. So if you are going to go with a thus saith the Lord, you cannot create two times of the ends. In fact, over and over again, she will tell you that we are living in the time of the end, not at the time of the end. And she'll tell you things like, if you want to work out when the end is going to happen, in the time of the end, when you want to work out what's going to happen in the time of the end would look like this: Sunday law, close of probation, second coming. She's going to tell you things like, no persons know when that's going to happen. We have no idea. The reason we have no idea because we have no time frame in which to understand when those things are going to happen. So there are no waymarks for us to hold on to bring us to these end time events. So what we do is we go to verse 40, and using a methodology of parable teaching, we create a waymark that is not there in inspiration, neither in the spirit of prophecy, nor in the Bible. We create a new waymark, the time of the end. And not being satisfied with that, what we then do is we create another waymark, 9/11. And 9/11 is not found in the scriptures. 9/11, you are going to have to search in Ellen White's writings. And the places that we normally go to for that is the book Testimonies for the Church, Volume 9, beginning page 11, and Review and Herald, July 5th, 1906. We go to those two passages. Sometimes people are more familiar with this one, Life Sketches, page 411. We go to those two passages, and what we do is not take a thus saith the Lord. We're going to take those passages and manipulate them, take them out of their context, and we're going to turn that into a 9/11 statement. From these two passages, passages you'll be combining together and make it a 9/11 statement. Now let me ask you, if I were to do this, chapters, you can call them paragraphs. If I said we agree that the subject of this was the close of probation, we both agree on that. Could you then take this and say that this was 9/11? So if you follow the methodology of parable teaching, if one chapter is close of probation and the other chapter 3 is close of probation, then by definition, chapter 2 should be close of probation and not 9/11. Do you think that's reasonable to do? And these are not even chapters, these are paragraphs. This is a breaking all the rules. Any rule that you ever knew. You know this is breaking that rule. But if you are going to tell someone a story, you begin here and you run through. Then you tell a story here, and then you jump to another story, and then you jump back into this one. So if you tell one story here, and then you change the subject till you do chapter 2, another story, and chapter 3, you go back to the first story. So that is breaking the rules. Unless you made it absolutely clear with some other evidence that that was the case, because this is what FFA would have you believe that Ellen White's going to be doing in these two passages, that she's talking about the subject matter, and it's clear to see that it's the close of probation. And then she's going to slip in surreptitiously this event here, which is the event of 9/11. That's what they would have you believe. And I'm saying this is a clear violation of anything and everything that we should hold on to if we really believe in a thus say the Lord and in intellectual integrity. We can't take all of this because it's not 9/11, it's the close of probation. And then we can make an application back to 9/11. We could do that, but Ellen White is not talking about 9/11 in these passages. And they still refuse to believe that. He's not dealing with that at this moment, but he's going to in a moment. But I just want you to see that this idea that he's introducing 9/11 into this story is really difficult to accept and believe. And I'm just going to say for this reason. When Michael stands up is the end of probationary time for all mankind, and it is the end of the judgment of the living that began at 9/11. That's FFA's statement. Now Ellen White tells you that no one knows when the judgment of the living begins. That's the first thing. So if no one knows when the judgment of the living begins, how do they claim that they know it's 9/11? How do you know the judgment of the living began at 9/11 if Ellen says no one knows where the judgment of the living begins? How do you make the connection that 9/11 was ever the judgment of the living? I don't know if you ever thought about that when we spoke about 9/11. When this movement goes on and on about 9/11, why don't we ever even tie back the judgment of the living to that reference point? So we're sort of giving a simple answer to that. The simple answer is this, that what we do is we take Spirit of Prophecy quote that talk about the latter rain. So we talk about the subject of the latter rain and then connecting it with the subject of the latter rain, we take the story of Revelation 18. And when you connect the story of latter rain, or her quotes connect that with the subject of Revelation 18, and then the story of the loud cry. Latter rain, Revelation 18, equals loud cry or midnight cry equals close of probation equals judgment of the living. When you start comparing all these concepts together and then start dealing with the close of probation, you take all of these thoughts and ideas and it leads you to the idea or the point of the judgment of the living. That's how we got the judgment of the living tied back to 9/11, because what we do is we say in the past the latter rain began here at 9/11, then we say Revelation 18 came down at 9/11, then we say the loud cry, which is connected to this story, which we're going to change, not call it the loud cry. What do we want to call it? The midnight cry, beginning the story, and it's going to be connected with this closer probation that's about to come, and all of this deals with the judgment of the living. That's why he says that from this perspective, know that the judgment of the living began at 9/11. That's the way he's going to approach that, and not at the Sunday law as I falsely teach. I'm going to go over this at least one or two times, so that's why I'm jumping back and forth. I want us to see something. Just take the concept of judging someone. When you judge someone, what does that mean? What's the inference behind judging someone? They must have done something, they must have made some action. And what are you going to do? You're going to make a judgment or a comment or an observation of what they've just done. Hopefully, we can see that. If you go back to the original judgment story, perhaps not the original one, but the second original one, we'll go to Cain and Abel. When you start judging that story, what event do we focus on? What event are we given? It's not that they fight or squabble over their toys, is it? Or one of them was rude or disrespectful to their parents. What was the test? It was about that sacrifice. One was going to offer a lamb and one was going to offer their produce. So it's a specific test. That was the test that marks who was going to be good and who was going to be bad. That was the great test for them. And based upon that great test, what can you do? Judge them who's right and who's wrong. Are we okay with that concept? So if you're going to make any kind of judgment upon someone, what do you need to have done first? You have to have tested them first to see if they're pass or fail the test. So they're going to be judged. Take Ellen White's model, her concept of that. Now the judgment of the living is a big issue in Bible prophecy. So it's the big thing that you're going to transfer or transition from the judgment of the dead to the judgment of the living. And if you're going to judge living people, what you need to do, you need to test them. What tests you want to bring to those people? What they eat, what they drink, how they dress, did they go to work and steal a pen? What tests you want to bring to the people at the end of the world, the final generation, to know whether that they have passed or failed in the judgment. When you have to have a big test for them, what would the big test be? My brother says the crisis. Ellen White says in Last Day Events 227, what did she say? You have to give a great test, have to be able to know whether they are going through a great judgment on the right or wrong side. How can you be judging people before they are tested? Ask yourself that question. How can you judge someone before you've even tested them? You can see it so intuitively easy to grasp hold of when you just think about it. I'm going to quote what he says. When Michael stands up, it's the end of probationary time for all mankind. We agree on that. And it's the end of the judgment of the living. We agree on that. He says that began at 9/11, which means if you are going to begin the judgment of the living at 9/11, there must be some great test there. And there is no great test there because 9/11 is a manufactured date, not from inspiration, not from structure. And if we're going to see a thus saith the Lord, we have to get all of that information from inspiration, not stuff that we manufactured, because she tells you how you can find out the answer to those questions. We can't just make them up as we go along. He says it's at 9/11, not at the Sunday law, as Parminder falsely teaches. And I want to say, I didn't falsely teach. It's the Sunday law. This is straight out of the spirit of prophecy. And when I say that there's not a spirit of prophecy quote that says judgment of the living is at the Sunday law, but you can't judge people until you have tested them. And the only test that's going to come, the great test upon God's people, Ellen White tells us, she defines it, is the image of the beast test, which is the Sunday law test. So you know when that's going to happen. If you want to have a secondary argument, we will take our line here in 1844, and we would say that this was the third angel message arriving in history. When is the third angel message going to be in power in history? Depends who you ask. This is an Ellen White story because the Ellen White story is progression. You're going to go from the arrival to its empowerment, and she's clear both in early writings, her first book, and the Great Controversy, her last book. From the Alpha and Omega, it's always the same story, that this is at Sunday law. This is Daniel 11:41, the Sunday law, the national Sunday law. It's not the 2014, the Raffia, the Panim one. That's when the third angel message is going to be empowered. Now, if you take this story and you fractalize it, what we tend to do is not to say that that's the empowerment of the third angel message. We tend to call that the arrival of the third angel. You've seen plenty of studies that do that. I put it in parentheses. This message here, the arrival of the third angel message, 1844, what is it mark? The judgment of the dead, the beginning of the judgment of the dead. Therefore, if you are going to do alpha, omega, repeat and enlarge, what is this mark, this one here? It would also mark the judgment, not of the dead, but of the living. It's the beginning of the judgment of the living. It's the great test that you can begin to make the judgment, because if you haven't been tested, what you're going to judge? You're going to judge, is the person nice? Was he respectful? You can't make judgment upon people until you've tested them. And this judgment is so important, just like the judgment of Cain and Abel was so important as it is in all these previous histories. It becomes such a critical issue, but you have to have a great test, and the only great test that comes upon God's people is the Sunday law test. Whenever we might understand the Sunday law test to be, we're dealing with it as a waymark in this line of history. The great test is here. Ellen White is clear on it. And that is therefore when the judgment of the living must have begun. It's not at 9/11. So when you take that concept and you mark it at National Sunday Law, what you need to see is who is that dealing with? What is the subject matter? Because we know it's not the priest, it's not the story of the priest, and it can't be the story of the Levites, and it certainly can't be the story of the Nethinims, which is how this movement used to teach it, and which, even though he doesn't explicitly say it, this is the implication of what he's going to say in this statement here. He's going to infer that this judgment of the living, which began at 9/11, or this great test that being referred to, is somehow somewhat connected with the Nethinims and not with the 144,000. I'm going to explain why that is, because there's a fundamental disconnect between what FFA is teaching and what we're teaching today and what we've taught for the last 24 months, which they have been silent upon, which now they're openly attacking. The great test for the priests is not Daniel 11, verse 41. What's the great test for the priests? 2014. Hopefully, we're okay with that. What's the great test for the Levites? Has to be the Sunday law. Do we agree with that? Has to be the Sunday law. That's the great test. Ellen White quote teaches us that. So we just take the quote and we apply it over each one of these histories. If the great test that she gives us is this one here, Daniel 11:41, close of probation, the great test for the priests becomes 2014. So the great test, the close of probation for the priests, and the close of probation for the Levites, and the close of probation for the Nethinims. The great test for the Levites becomes Raphia, and therefore the great test for the Nethinims would become Panium. If that's all those great tests, 2014, Raphia, and Panium, what Bible verse are they all in? They're in Daniel verse 40 or Daniel verse 41. During Daniel 11 verse 40. So we haven't even got to Daniel 11 verse 41, which is the great test that she's speaking about here. When Edom, Moab, and Ammon come out of Babylon, what Sunday law is that one? What great test is that one? Who is that great test for? Because it can't be for the priests. They've already had their great test. Can't be for the Levites. They've already had their great test. It can't be for the Nethinims. They've already had their great test. Who is the great test for here, National Sunday Law? The great test, who is it for? Because it's not for the priests, Levites, or Nethinims. Who must it be for? So someone's going to say for 144,000. So I just want to finish reading what he says. And this is the problem that you are confronted with, whoever you are, if you want to decide who's right and who's wrong. I just go back. When Michael stands up, it is the end of probationary time for all mankind. It is the end of the judgment of the living, which began at 9/11, which it did not at Sunday law, as Parminder falsely teaches, which I did, which is why I said that this is 2014. 2014 is the Sunday law. It is the great test for the priests. began back here. So when I did this, how many of these Sunday laws would you have? Before you got to this one, you have one for the priest, 2014. The next one, you would have Raphia for the Levites. The next one, you would have Panim for the Nethinims. So you take this spirit of prophecy quote and you would apply it 3 times. And in the 3 times that you'd apply it, it would all be the great test for that group of people. It's clear to see if you follow the lines. FFA again. When Michael stands up, it is the close of probation for all mankind. And on another line of truth, it is the end of the judgment of the living, and the judgment of the living began 9/11. It did not. And has 3 groups of persons that it tests and purifies, the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. Can you begin to see what he says? How many groups are there? The 3 groups of people that it tests, priests, Levites, and Nethinims. If it's priests, Levites, and Nethinims, and they're going to be tested by this concept of the great test, the great close of probation of them, what he's begun to do is mix up and muddle up the lines. Because when we start talking about the close of probation for the priests, where is the close of probation for the priests? I'm going to place it here. This would be the close of probation for the priests. It's before the second advent. That's the second advent, the last waymark. That would be second, so it's back here. If you are okay with that one. The close of probation for the Levites, where would that be? So that would be here. What's the problem with that? A dot is a point in time, and here's already said what? Close of probation for the Levites is progressive, without defining what progressive means. So if it's progressive, it began here and went to where? Went to the end. So we'll come to the Nethinims. Where's the close of probation for the Nethinims? Here, and that too is progressive. So where is the end? So it ends here. So the question is, when we start talking about the close of probation for the Nethinims, which waymark do you want to pick? You want to pick the Sunday law or Daniel 12:1. When you talk about the close of probation for the Nethinims, which waymark do you want to pick? So what he is surreptitiously done, accidentally, depending on how you look at it, he said there's only 3 groups. He says only 3 groups having close of probation must there be. 3 closes of probation, one for each group. The first one begins where? Raphia 2019. He holds to that. Don't care about the middle one. That end one, when is the end of close of probation? What waymark do you want to give it? So I'm going to say 3 groups: priests, Levites, and Nethinims. The close of probation begins at Raphia. Where is the end? Which waymark do you want to mark for the end of close of probation for the Nethinims? So now you've got a dilemma. Are you going to call it the Sunday law, or you're going to call it Daniel 12:1? So it depends of the point that you want to make. That's what's important to see. So the point that he wants to make it here, Daniel 12:1. So he's going to go from the beginning to the end. But that may or may not be accurate. So what he wants to do is to say that you've only got 3 groups, and the last one is Daniel 12:1, where Daniel says is the close of probation for humanity. So Daniel 12:1 is marking the close of probation for which group of people? The Nethinims. Because he's going to say there are only three groups. This is the error he's claiming that I teach. I'm going to read on. Michael stands up. It is the close of probation for all mankind. And on another line of truth, it is the end of the judgment of the living. And the judgment of the living began 9/11. There's three groups of persons that it identifies and purifies: priests, Levites, and Nethinims. When Parminder's unholy emphasis on four, priests, Levites, Nethinims, 144,000, four close of probations, he also brought confusion in concerning the 144,000, which was a subject in this movement that was generally downplayed, for Sister White counsels us not to argue who the 144,000 are. So that's the nice argument, because Ellen White says, don't worry who 144,000 are. And he's saying, if Ellen White says, don't worry about it, then we should do that, not worry about it. If I were to say the same thing when Ellen White says, don't worry about the subject of the daily, will he use the same argument to say, she says, don't worry about it, so we shouldn't worry about it? Of course, he would not do that. He would give a convoluted argument to prove why the date is an important issue in our history, even though it wasn't in their history. The reason that she says we don't need to know who the 144,000 is only because she's living in this history here, 1840s, and there is no need for anyone to know there. Is no way of anyone knowing when that's going to happen. Why don't they know? Because that information is sealed. There's no way of them knowing that, and that's what she says. That's why she downplays this. It's not because we're not required to know who the 144,000 are. Just think about how crazy that one statement is. Ellen White says, let's not worry who the 144,000 is. Therefore, this movement should also not worry about the 144,000. Who the 144,000 is. Is that a tenable situation? Of course it's not. I had assumed it was a literal number, but also recognized the symbolic understanding of 144,000 as well. But I did not make it an established point because it was error. There is no way that the 144,000 is a literal number. It just can't be when you take a thus saith the Lord. Where do you go to Ellen White's writing or the Bible or William Foy's writing? None of them will give you clear or equivocal statement that it's a literal number. You just can't do that. Parminder brought our William Foy's reference of the 144,000 being symbolic, and he did so in connection with this teaching that the 144,000 were priests. Like that's something revolutionary, because this movement used to teach 144,000 are whom? Priests and Levites. So I just said it's not priests and Levites, it's only priests. And these things become heretical statement, just to try to clarify who they are. FFA again. Bring the point out of William's Foy reference of who the 144,000 beings of symbolic, and he did so in connection with his teaching that the 144,000 are priests. The reason why he wants to do that is because he's going to say there are stocks of Levites in the church, and what's going to happen is once you've got a couple of hundreds of hours of priests, how many Levites you're going to get? 140? How are you going to take that number, 140,000 plus this X number, which make up the Levites? and then all add up to literally 144,000. That's why he's saying I'm forced to make it symbolic if I'm only making it priests. These are also circular arguments as they were identified in Revelation. This brought about a justification for making Daniel 12:1 the close of probation for the 144,000. And in so doing, opened the door to the idea that the door only closes for the foolish priests at Raphia. Now you begin to see where he comes to. But that the wise continue on to be tested at the next closed door, which is Panium, then the next closed door until you get to Daniel 12:1. I'll paraphrase what I'm saying, which is correctly identified. The priests equal the 144,000. That's what I'm saying. So the priest's close of probation is Raphia. I call it 2019. The Levites' close of probation is 2021, Panium. The close of probation for the Nethinims is the National Sunday Law, Daniel 11, verse 41. And I'm saying that 144,000, their close of probation is Daniel 12:1. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. And the priests have to navigate their way all the way through this history. And the problem or the issue that he's saying that I'm teaching that's wrong is that a priest gets to this 2019 test and passes it. But what they must do after that, they must go to 2021. They must go through that test, and they have the potential of failing the test. They go to this story, and they have the potential of failing the test as you go through. So whether you can see it or not, what he wants to tell you is that the priest's close of probation begins and ends where? Here at Raphia 2019. So in a few days, the close of probation of the priest is final and complete. There is no more opportunity for salvation if you are a priest after 2019. You cannot fail. You are completely sealed for eternity. The story is ended. Michael had stood up for you. That's what he's teaching here. That's why he only has 3 groups. You'll see this as we read on. It really becomes problematic when you start dealing with this. So he's going to say that this is what I would call a hard close of probation. There is no more opportunity after this event, 2019. So he and all of his followers, none of them or all of them, become righteous in this. They're going to give themselves a small window of opportunity. That's what they're going to do between November and January 2020. It's about a month and a week, 7 weeks. They've got about 7 weeks more window that they have created for themselves because they're into time setting, and they're going to say this is the close of probation for all of those righteous priests. And after that moment, there is no opportunity to be lost. You are sealed. That's the position that they're taking. And the position that we have taken in this movement, that November 9, there is a close of probation, is not a hard close of probation. We've still got a lot more to navigate through. And what you may not notice as he does, that is that what he's doing, he's now shifted to what methodology? Progression. You are going to progress from the priests to the Levites to the Nethinims, and there's no 144,000. There's no 144,000 line, and that of itself become extremely problematic when you start looking at that, because he's destroyed the line of the Nethinims. What waymark is this for the Nethinims? Second coming. This is a second advent for the Nathanims. This is their harvest. If this is a second advent for the Nathanims, who's the second advent for? You begin to have this nebulous idea of humanity in general. Humanity in general is not a reform line. It's just this nebulous concept, is this nebulous idea which they no longer have a reform line for, unless you have this reform line here, the 144,000. And if you're to do that, you are forced to come to a place where you have a close of probation for that group of people. That close of probation is not the close of probation for the Nathanims. Close of probation for the Nathanims is not marked by Daniel 12:1. It's marked by the National Sunday Law, Daniel 11:41. Is the beginning, and the beginning. So they've switched from a concept of repeat and enlarge to progression only. This concept destroys the purification of the church until Michael stands up, and destroys the idea there's any sign consists of pure people that are only thereafter joined by other pure people. I explained that. First, you have to purify the church. You purify the church. What do? You purify the world. The world can only come into a purified church. Therefore, these people have to be pure. What does purification look like? It means you are fully sealed, fully perfect. Everything's complete and done. So the Levites need to have had their close of probation before the Sunday law, as the priest did. 2019, 2021, it's a hard close of probation. It could be pure people so that other pure people can come in. All of this is pure outright error. The reason is error. It's not consistent with the lines which they claim to believe themselves. If they claim to believe that their close of probation of the Nathanims goes from the Sunday law to this point here, what they've done is destroy the line. Because even though they want to call this Daniel 12:11 and Daniel 12:1, and Daniel 12:1 is the close of probation, this is not a close of probation of Nathanims. How can it be? Because the close of probation, if I were just to do this line, what follows the close of probation? Harvest. When is the harvesting of Nathanims? It's here. This is the harvesting of the Nathanims. So how can you have the close of probation coming after the harvest? The close of probation have to be before the harvest, right here where it's been placed on this reform line correctly. They're destroying their lines. They're no longer working upon line methodology anymore. What they're doing is going back to Elder Jeff, as Elder Jeff stated in this first presentation, going back to a Laodicean methodology, Laodicean ideology that doesn't use line upon line to work out its structure. So they have no idea how this line works, even though they claim that they do. His confusion, my confusion, provides a model for an impure people until you get to Michael stands up. You need to ask yourself if what I'm introducing is confusion. Is it an erroneous idea that we don't have a perfect people? It depends how you define perfection. Perfection is defined by the great test, not by something that you're not tested on. If you are not tested on something, you can't make a judgment on it. And you know the one thing that we're tested on is the Sunday law issue. We're not tested on any other issue. If you wanted to go back to a Laodicean methodology, you would know that that's the whole premise, the foundation upon which Adventism stands. What's the difference between the Adventist Church and the Catholic Church? The Catholics steal, lie, and cheat? They don't. Do Muslims? No. Do atheists? No. Do Adventists? No. The only distinguishing mark between us and them, I say in a simple fashion, is the Sabbath issue connected with the sanctuary. That's the only distinguishing mark, and that's why Adventists believe it becomes the great test. It's a singular issue, not some nebulous idea. So when we take that concept and we apply it correctly, the great test for the priests is a Sunday law test, which is 2014. Then it becomes Raphia for the Levites and Tanium for the Nethinims. That's what the great test is. That's where the judgment or the close of probation would be. That's what the judgment of the living or the great test, which then leads to the close of probation for those people. As I read these chats, I see he's got some personal chats. I don't know what they are. I see people that still hold to some of those concepts that were put in place by Parminder's satanic idea. So you have to ask yourself the question, is this a satanic idea to understand this is the second advent? Is this a satanic idea that the close of probation comes before the harvest? If those are satanic ideas, then he's introducing truth and error into his own narrative. At least we're fully satanic if we would to hold on to that. These were not a mixture of truth and error, and you know the definition of satanic theology is what? A combination of truth and error. They never teach error on its own. They always teach truth and error, and that's what we've seen right through this page and and the half that we've read. At least what I'm teaching is consistent. It's either consistently all wrong or consistently all right. One of the two. You can never have something that's consistently wrong all the way through because there's no model for that. It's always truth and error against the truth. So by definition, this must be the truth because it's consistent. Millerite history is repeated in our history, and there was a noted controversy concerning the doctrine of the shut door in Sister White's age, and thus informing us that will come again, that there will be again a controversy about the closed door in our history. He's correct on that. This is that controversy about what a shut door looks like. Here's his right upon that. What is the shut door of 2014 look like? And the reason why he won't tackle that is because he no longer accepts that in 2014 was the Sunday law, the great test for the priests. Because if he did, he would destroy his own message. So he wants to shift everything to the close of probation, which is close of probation here for the priests, which is raphia, which is not our great test. Does the door close only for the foolish in that particular testing period, or does it close for both? We always thought, and Parminder would give lip service to the following. We always thought that the everlasting gospel was a three-step testing prophetic message that would develop and demonstrate character among those who were held accountable for the testing process. We further thought that the first two of these prophetic tests, first and second angels' messages, took place where probationary time was open for those being tested, but the third test was different in that it took place when probation closed at the third test and when both classes were then separated. And this is the error that FFA have held on to from the very beginning. For many years, the third waymark, the third test, was a singular point in time. If you're familiar with those studies, you should know that, and then that got expanded and became a period of time. So if we do that, first, second, when you get to the second, we have a point in time, which we would call the third. This is what uses to be taught, and then what we realized, even they would testify to this, that this one became a period of time. They would call it time dilation. They came up with all these fancy theories. But it became a period of time. And so the third got put into this, and this is straight error. This is not correct. The third angel message is not this history when this is the close of probation, which is what he's just taught. It's not that, and the reason you know that, because if you go to the Great Controversy or you go to early writings and you run through the chapter titles, it says the third message closed. Sister Tess took us through that study. When does the third angel message closes? At the close of probation. The third angel message closes at the close of probation. It doesn't begin at the close of probation. This is the close of probation. The third angel message is here before the close of probation, not after it. This is the error that they are promulgating, which they're accusing us of doing. Both the parable of the tares and that of the net plainly teaches that there is no time when all the wicked will turn to God. Now he's going to quote from a spirit of prophecy, obviously. The spirit of prophecy is correct. He's quoting from Christ Object Lesson, page 123. This is interesting because this is the ABC, the 1, 2, 3 of all these, and they've got it wrong. They don't know where to place the work of the third angel. It occurs before probation closes, not after probation closes. The harvest is not the work of the third angel. It's clear to see that if you go into inspiration. Therefore, we thought that the third test was different than the first two, which was wrong. And we explained it as a test where character is manifested or demonstrated. Where do you manifest the character? Where the plants are in the field, not when they're out of the field. A test such as the pregnancy test, where the woman urinated, so he goes on to this model that he generated, which is all wrong. No probation, either red or blue, foolish or wise. Parminder destroyed this understanding by turning 3 close of probation into 4, and in manufacturing confusion about who the 144,000 were. Because he wants to go back to a broken model to say that the 144,000 are both the priests and Levites, and you can see where he's headed to, that he wants to make it a literal number. This is just taken from a portion of one presentation. That's one of I don't know how many presentations that they've made. You can clearly see how this is all a combination of truth and error, that they profess to give lip service to these lines, but they don't believe in the lines. They don't even know where to place the third angel message. They're placing the third angel message in the history of the harvest, where we know the third angel message doesn't even do any harvesting. if you're not clear on that, just go to this chart. And he's pointing to the charts where you have the first angel, second angel, third angel, and then after the third angel finishes its work, and then what do you see? Harvest, the angel with the sickle. The harvest is after the third angel, not the third angel in the harvest. This is the mistake that they're making. It's one after another after another. We can go on and on showing you what why they are completely wrong. I don't know what else to say. I know this was a long presentation, but if anybody has comments or questions, as much as I was able to understand, I had a little bit of hard time with this second part. So anybody has any comments?
I understand Parminder's why that the priests are it's three groups because the priests are the 144,000.
Yeah, so we do have 4 groups.
But it's in the study that I'm doing, it's 4 groups, but the priests and the 144,000 are the same group.
I think it's like 3 groups, but 4 harvests.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because the first group is actually the last group.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so all the issue with 9/11 and 2015 and 2014, as I said, this was actually an explanation to explain people, all the error from FFA.
Mm-hmm.
And
then the 2014 was kind of like a big test because at first we didn't get it. I didn't get, what the 2014 when they were saying about the Sunday law, and now, later on and now in our studies now, because we're such into studying and writing out the presentations, now we understand about 2014.
Yeah, so the understanding for 2014 was the 126. That it was supposed to be a Sunday law in 2014, which was the great test for the priests.
Right.
So if you had a test for the priests, then as he says, after the test, you have a test, then after the test comes the judgment of the living. And I do remember those times when Brother Pippinger and some other brothers were trying to explain why 9/11 is the judgment of the living. So
I remember that because I remember they were saying that because I remember being in my church here, and it was a Sabbath school, and they were talking about the judgment of living, and we don't know when that is, and I'm like, I want to tell them because it's 9/11, but you couldn't. So but it's that it's now it's not what it is.
yeah. Wow, that was a long reading.
That was good though.
I have a thought. Yes, I enjoyed this study. It's it could be very confusing though, because I don't have the background, from when did this error all start to come in? Was it in 2014 or before 2014, I should say, from Jeff?
Remember that the first angel doesn't understand everything. So it was all, like Parminder said, a nebulous idea. They did not correctly understand. So when Parminder came in and he started introducing from 2012 the time setting and explaining 2014 Sunday law. And he was going differently. He was, you know, how you read the Spirit of Prophecy, Ellen White places, you know, the great test, National Sunday Law. And that's when you have all these other tests happening and stuff. And Brother Pippinger did not want to accept this. He refused, you know. So his fall started in 2012, but us, we just learned what he told us. I came in the movement in 2014, but I haven't heard of Parminder or, you know, whatever he was teaching. All we knew about was Jeff Pippinger. So we had the error until, I don't know, I can say for myself, it's just last year when things start straightening up for us.
I thought that what was very amazing with Parminder, and the reason why, I don't know, God has gifted him in many ways, same as he's with Elder Tetz. But Parminder, it was amazing for me to understand and to really just sit and reflect how he studied the steps of Christ for 3 years. And so in doing that,
because he's thinking about every word. He's looking how Ellen White places things. He's thinking, you know, how is this? How is real life? It's not just what I would do, just read on the surface, you know.
Right.
It's so funny. Right before you said that, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, the Lord has really been blessing us with knowledge now, because like we're learning, there's so much that we need to unlearn. And we see that every time we're going through these presentations, because now we're doing it ourselves, we're reading, we're understanding as we're reading. And we do have a lot to unlearn, because we were reading wrong, because the pioneers were reading wrong, because of how they were reading, how they came to their conclusions was wrong. And so it's like a domino effect. And now we got to put the dominoes away, you know, and just start all over in many ways.
And I'm going to say another thing is, if somebody was maybe understanding something else, they were afraid to say it, because then they would come against leadership, you know. So that was another problem. But yeah, look at what I outline here. It says perfection is defined by the great test. So if you look at one person and you think they have lots of problems, and you know how we looked at people, how they dress and what they eat and all this kind of stuff, judging them if they're perfect or not. Actually, perfection is defined by the great test. That's all perfection means. And thanks God for that.
Amen.
If it would be after our own ideas, nobody would be perfect.
Thank you so much for the study.
Amen.
So anybody wants to close in prayer? It's like I lost my voice a little bit.
I'll close. Holy Heavenly Father, Lord God, happy Sabbath. Thank you for being in our midst, in our lives, in our hearts. Thank you, Father, for the messages and the truths that are coming out. Thank you for allowing us to see perfectly all the things that we thought we knew weren't so, and to accept the fact, Father, that we have been misreading. We didn't know about the parables and how to work them. We didn't know how to read the Bible and go into the different dictionaries. We thought we did, but we didn't have the mind of Christ at that time. You have been instilling in us so many blessings of truth and wisdom and even going into action, Father, and studying together. You have been bringing people together, your messengers for the end of the world, and preparing us, Father, through these studies and learning of them individually, even of how to go out and teach, so that we could teach others to teach, and others can teach others to teach. Father, we are so grateful that you are in our lives. We ask that you stand by our side. Don't let us go. We know you won't. It's our own feeble minds that sometimes we think we won't make it, but we know that you're a surety. We know that if we just keep our eyes stayed on you, if we cling to you, if we do as you command, and you will finish the work that you have begun. I want to thank you for the blessings that we had tonight, spiritually. And thank you for the company of bringing us all together as brothers and sisters in unity. We thank you, Father, for all you have done and what you're continuing to do in our hearts and in our minds, in our lives and in our home and in our work and everything that we do. We love you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
And
Well, I wish everybody a good Sabbath, and we'll see you in the morning.